Sk 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 noop noop sk 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 noop noop. Hey there, you must be Eddie. Yeah, this is my new Stanley. Yeah. Oh, you don't have one? Sk 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 noop noop sk 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 noop noop. How do you make your friendship bracelets, man? That's kind of weird. All right, save the turtles. Oh, these? Yeah, just my leather bracelets. I notice you're not wearing one. Here, take this one. Yeah, keep it. Don't even worry about it. Sk 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 noop noop sk 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 noop noop. This is just my favorite lip balm. Put it on every 5 to 10 minutes. Yeah. Totally my fave. You should get some too. You're not wearing a hat. Here, I got you covered with that too. No problem. Keep it. Yep. Don't worry. Oh, new scent. Yeah, fresh. You don't. Oh no, never. Oh, see that is. It's fantastic. Yep, go for that too. And you don't have a flannel, but you know what? I brought an extra one of those too, so I got you covered. All right, man, keep it. Yep, don't worry about it. All right, Eddie, it was a pleasure to meet you. Power to the people. Hey, everybody. Okay, timer begins. Feel like I'm putting myself in timeout. I'm going to finish this in less than 10 minutes. Okay, chapter 2 of Caritas and Veritate. You guys just read this and looked at it a little bit last week. So, quick summary of it. I'm going to try and get to the point. Sections 21 through 33 of the document, two kind of main points here. Number one, what is integral human development, right? What is Paul VI's vision for that, economically, socially, and politically, okay? And then number two, what are some major barriers that are currently blocking that development from happening? All right. So this is the opening quote from these sections. Paul VI in Populorum Progressio, remember that document we mentioned last week. Paul VI had an articulated vision of development. He understood the term to indicate the goal of rescuing peoples, first and foremost, from hunger, deprivation, endemic diseases, and illiteracy. From the economic point of view, this meant their active participation on equal terms in the international economic process. From the social point of view, it meant their evolution into educated societies marked by solidarity. From the political point of view, it meant the consolidation of democratic regimes capable of ensuring freedom and peace. All right, so that's the opening quote, just laying it out there. Here's what Paul VI meant. All right, so what is human development? Okay, it means rescuing, first and foremost, means rescuing peoples from hunger, deprivation, endemic diseases, and illiteracy. Okay, so hunger, deprivation. Okay, we're talking about caring for their material needs, basic necessities for life. Okay, endemic diseases, of course, part of that health. So want them to be able to survive and be healthy. And then illiteracy obviously prevents personal development because reading is an extremely powerful way to receive an education and develop as a person with your intellect, and also to develop your affect, your love as well. Okay, so those are very important human dimensions to development. All right, so economically, this means active and just participation in the international economic process. Talking about poorer countries, what does it look like for a poorer country to become economically developed? Well, he says that means allowing them or getting to the point where they can participate in international trade and the international economic scene, if you will, okay, on a more or less equal footing with the United States and Germany and other developed countries. Okay, so economic development means bringing those smaller underdeveloped countries up to speed economically so they can compete. Not necessarily compete, but they can survive on a world scale. Socially, that means becoming educated societies, all right, so getting rid of that illiteracy, because that's just good for personal development, that exhibit solidarity, okay? So there's a cultural and social element there of developing this shared vision for what society should be and standing with one another. And then politically, establishing democratic governments capable of ensuring freedom and peace, okay? So power to the people in the sense that we should have a say in our own decision-making process as a society, right? That's a very Catholic form of government in the sense that it respects the dignity of each individual person as an equal with the others, okay? And democratic, capable of ensuring freedom and peace, all right? Okay, so how are we doing then? Okay, takes a little look here. He says, well, first of all, the world's wealth is growing in absolute terms, okay, meaning that the total amount of money in the world today, or wealth in the world today, is greater than it was 40 years ago, or 50 years, was it 40? It's 40 years ago when Paul VI wrote that encyclical, Popular and Progressio. All right, so we're wealthier as a world, but inequality is greater than it used to be as well. Okay, so in rich countries, you have some people who are falling into poverty. Some are getting richer, some are getting poorer. And in developing countries, poorer areas, you've got some groups, some small like oligarchical groups at the top of society that are enjoying kind of super development because maybe 10 families own 90% of the land in that country. Okay, think of small countries in South America. All right, this happened in the 80s and stuff a lot. Okay, and throughout the world in a certain sense. But when you've got that kind of oligarchy at the top, those people are enjoying huge economic gains, but other people in that country are suffering from dehumanizing deprivation. So the gap between the rich and the poor is growing, even though in global terms, the total amount of wealth is growing. Okay. All right, so wealthier countries are sometimes too strict in protecting their intellectual property, especially, he says, with advancements in healthcare. So good countries with good healthcare systems, all right, we're like, no, we came up with this technology, we came up with these treatments, okay, we're going to keep them for the sake of basically keeping the rights to them, all right. He's saying, look, that needs to be shared. That is a kind of a human resource, okay. It's a matter of charity to actually share that with people, other countries. Some poorer countries preserve cultural models and social norms that actually hinder development. All right, so cyclical ways of thinking kind of prevent progress, thinking that, human life and nature, they just exist in the cycle. It's basically a closed circular system. Development is a linear way of thinking, right? We are here, but we're trying to get further, and then from there we'll get further developed, and so on and so forth. All right. I'm way behind. So, mere and economic technological progress are not enough. So true development has to improve all aspects of society, okay, economic, social, and political. And he wants a new comprehensive plan for development. Okay. All right, starts getting to specific challenges in the next 5 sections. We're just going to glaze over a lot of these. All right, fine. Rapid globalization leads to governments dealing with a loss of control over their own economies. So when Paul VI wrote Popular and Progressio in the 60s, globalization was at a much earlier point in development, okay? Nowadays, you've got such vast international economic markets and systems that individual countries don't really have a lot of control, or at least as much control over their own economies. Think about how big Amazon is, okay? Amazon is this global corporate empire in essence, okay? It's got offices outside of the United States, okay? Or Nike with factories outside of the United States. The US can't regulate those things, okay? The only thing we can do is maybe put up tariffs or things like that to keep imports more expensive than domestic products or things like that. But we don't have as much control over the economy as a country because companies within our country have gone well beyond the borders of the United States. Okay. So he says that is kind of creating an interesting situation for governments to figure out what the limits of their power are. Global markets also they have led to countries competing with each other to offer the cheapest labor possible. Think about sweatshops. Why are sweatshops possible? Well, it's because countries like Taiwan and Bangladesh and China, they're almost competing to provide the cheapest labor possible so that American companies like Nike or Adidas or whatever other manufacturers will come to those countries to bring jobs to those countries and factories. All right. So Nike looks around, goes, all right, boom, Taiwan or Thailand, this is like the cheapest place for us to make shoes. So let's build our factories there. And so then Thailand and Bangladesh end up competing to see who can offer the lowest prices, wages, that is. Well, that often leads to eliminating social security measures, okay? So because they want to keep labor prices so low, They don't put Social Security stuff in, like if you lose your job, you don't have unemployment or something like that. Okay, and minimizing the rights of workers, so the safety of workers, the number of hours that they have to work, and so on. Basically, labor protection laws are just not put in place because if they did that, the cost of labor would go up and they would lose the factories. Okay. All right. So Pope Benedict is saying that's a big problem. Okay. The rights of workers are in serious jeopardy there. All right. On the other hand, unemployment, dependence on welfare systems, that undermines the freedom and creativity of the person and his family and social relationships, which can cause psychological and spiritual suffering. So not having a job is also really bad for people. Okay, I've mentioned that before in class. So you're kind of stuck here between like, we want to get these jobs in here because not having jobs is bad, but we want to do it in a way that respects the rights of workers. Okay, how do we do that? Well, you've got to find a human balance there. Okay, and companies like Nike and companies looking for cheap international labor, they have to factor that in as well. Okay, they have to look at the conditions that their factory workers are going to be experiencing. Okay, things that threaten, I should say, threats to beneficial cultural exchange, because globalization has made it so that we can exchange cultural ideas and things like that very easily. What threatens this? Well, he says cultural eclecticism, which is when you basically have various cultures, Chinese culture and Hispanic culture and Norwegian culture, let's say, all living next to each other. And they're just looked at as substantially equivalent or interchangeable. No one is better than the other. They don't have comparative advantages or anything like that, or moral criteria to judge them. Basically, this leads to cultural relativism, and that prevents true integration. You just have these separate communities. You got the Chinese community, the Latino community, and the Scandinavian community or Norwegian community, and they're all just living next to each other, minding their own business. There's no integration there, which is a problem because there's no unity. Okay. The opposite problem, though, is cultural leveling, which is just an indiscriminate blending these cultures. So the Chinese people get rid of their culture, the Norwegians get rid of their culture, and the Latino population gets rid of theirs. They just kind of blend them all together, and they become this bland American culture, which is really no culture at all. So then you just lose authentic culture. So you've got to find a balance there. Okay, how do we come together with these various cultures so they can live next to each other and integrate while preserving their own unique identities and cultural treasures? All right, that's what Paul VI is going for there. All right, hunger, big problem. Okay, he says this is not really usually due to food shortages. Sometimes it is. It's usually because there's a lack of economic institutions that can provide on a consistent basis sufficient food and water. Supply chain problems. Okay, and then agricultural underdevelopment as well. Okay, so we need to work to remedy those things, get those structures in place so food and water can be supplied. All right. International aid has a role in this, he thinks. Talks about a lack of respect for life. Infant mortality is a problem, which is something better healthcare can help with. Okay, but then contraception and abortion. All right, he looks at these, says they're often promoted by governments, like they are in the United States, at least have been for the past 40 or so years, 50 years, and non-government organizations or NGOs. Okay, contraception and abortion lead to what he calls an anti-birth mentality. Okay, meaning that it's also called the contraceptive mentality. This idea that sex really doesn't have anything to do, or shouldn't necessarily have anything to do with having babies. All right. What that ends up doing is distorting our view of sex and of the human person. Okay. So he says openness to life is at the center of true development, right? So an openness to life strengthens moral fiber and makes people capable of mutual help, basically by creating a person-centered attitude. If you're open to life, you are recognizing the value and dignity of human life at every stage, okay? That's going to affect how you look at other people who are already alive and around you. Okay, so a person-centered attitude has to be open to life. He also calls out NGOs and governments like the United States at times for trying to impose this anti-birth mentality, tying international aid to abortion and contraception. The Gates Foundation does this. oftentimes, or at least they promote like sending condoms to Africa, basically. All right, so a lot of organizations like that will push those things. All right, the denial of religious freedom talks about religious violence like terrorism. That's obviously harmful for development. But he also talks about promoting religious indifference and practical atheism. Says those also obstruct development. So getting God out of the picture hurts us. He says that deprives us of the moral and spiritual strength that's indispensable for attaining integral human development. All right. In other words, without God, we don't have the energy or the drive to pursue authentic development. All right. Okay. And wealthier countries often export that kind of practical atheism. Again, cultural influence. So this quote is beautiful. If man were merely the fruit of either chance or necessity, or if he had to lower his aspirations to the limited horizon of the world in which he lives, if all reality were merely history and culture, and man did not possess a nature destined to transcend itself in a supernatural life, then one could speak of growth or evolution, but not development. In other words, like, okay, layman's terms, right? If there were no God, we could talk about society evolving or growing. Wealth is growing objectively, but no development because there's no transcendent end that we're moving towards. There's no ultimate purpose to any of it. And without a purpose, it's growth, it's evolution, it's change, but it's not true development. Development has to have a direction. And without God, change in society loses that. Okay. All right, so path forward, last notes here. Integral human development requires synthesizing the different levels / fields of human knowledge. Okay, so he says moral evaluation and scientific research must work together, united and driven by charity. So you can't have the scientists working over here just saying this is what's possible, and then the moral theologians or philosophers over here saying this is what's good and what's bad in general terms. Okay, scientists and moralists have to work together and look at what are the scientists doing? What are the moral implications of this? Okay, and this does happen, all right, but we got to keep doing it. And he says this is what makes Catholic social teaching uniquely valuable. Okay, it allows faith, theology, metaphysics, and science to come together in a collaborative effort in the service of humanity. So Catholic social teaching looks at the science, it looks at philosophy, but it looks at it all through the perspective of divine revelation. Okay, so without that theological picture, we're not looking at the whole picture. Okay, if we don't look at the reality that Christ came down and revealed us fully to ourselves, all right, and we look all the way back to the beginning. My hands keep going off screen. All right, and don't look all the way back to the beginning and say, what was creation meant to be, right? Like we've looked at in Genesis throughout the semester. If we don't do that, we don't have the whole picture, okay? We need that part of the picture, that information, in order to guide the science, okay? And give direction to development. All right. So, of course, all solutions have to respect the dignity of the human person and all of the different aspects of the person. So, physical, spiritual, social, etc. Merely economic or technological solutions are not really solutions. Okay. So, economically says wealth disparities shouldn't increase in a morally unacceptable manner. In other words, the wealth gap shouldn't get too big. And then steady access to employment for everyone has to be a priority. The dignity of work, we're made for work. We need that to fulfill us and to provide for our needs, right? Short-term economic benefits shouldn't outweigh long-term development. And then culturally, we can't reduce cultures to their technological dimension, all right? He says our current moral, cultural, and environmental crises, we'll talk more about the environment eventually, I think, are proof of this, all right? Cultures are more than just their technological development. All right. All right. This last quote is about globalization. So the principal new feature in the world since Populorum Progressio was written in 1967 has been the explosion of worldwide interdependence, commonly known as globalization. Without the guidance of charity and truth, this global force could cause unprecedented damage and create new divisions within the human family. Hence, charity and truth confront us with an altogether new and creative challenge. It is about broadening the scope of reason and making it capable of knowing and directing these powerful new forces, animating them within the perspective of that civilization of love whose seed God has planted in every people, in every culture. Okay, awesome quote, right? What's it come down to? Globalization can be awesome if we allow charity and truth to guide it together. Okay, that involves broadening the scope of reason, which means taking into account divine revelation, right? Revealed truth, not just science. Okay, and if we do that and we look at this within a perspective of the full truth about the world and the human person, then we can direct globalization in a proper direction. Otherwise, we'll have global disaster, global catastrophe. All right, cool. So that went well over 10 minutes. I apologize for that, but it's just such a rich section I had to cover it. Okay.